Jesus gave his life a ransom yonder on Calvary, on Mount Calvary, cruel Calvary, paved the way by blood that we might win a bright shining crown. Praise his holy name. Salvation has been brought down, O glory. Praise the Lord, salvation has been brought down.
Welcome you to season number 3 of the Harvester Podcast. We're happy that you are with us today. I am one of your hosts, Brian Kenyon. Along with me are
Stephen Ford,
George Beals.
And Forrest Animas Harris is usually with us, but this is a busy time of year for him. He's had a brand new baby just recently and a lot of other things going on. And so he will join us next time as soon as he can, if that makes any sense. Next time as soon as he can. But anyway, we're discussing here lessons on Christian apologetics, whole season 3. And we've been discussing the existence of God for the last few episodes. And today's episode, we're in for a treat. It is the Cosmological argument number 2 on the existence of God. And this one is entitled The Process of Elimination Argument. But before we get into the details of that argument, George, bring us up to speed from where we were last time.
Well, let's do a quick review of where we were last time, pointing out that we're trying to develop step by logical step the argument that shows that God exists and that the Bible is the Word of God and the Bible teaches a particular matter. We can know that that particular teaching is true. So if God exists and the Bible is the Word of God and the Bible teaches some doctrine, call it X, then that doctrine must be true. Now that has to be the case, because if indeed the Bible is the word of a being who knows everything and never lies, then whenever that being is teaching his case in the Scriptures, that would have to be a true statement. So we're looking at, first of all, God exists, and that's where we are. We're trying to establish that God does exist. And we have already talked about the design argument, which I believe does establish that God exists, that in and of itself. The design argument, in essence, says that if you have an object that has parts that work together to accomplish an identifiable purpose, then you have design. And if you've got design, then there had to have been a designer who not only exists, but has attributes at least equal to the task of causing such a wonderful design, a wonderful object. So the conclusion stated was that a house or a toothbrush, for example, or a clock had an intelligent cause, not a non-intelligent cause. This is because we know that humans have made such objects, plus, not just that, but plus, each is an object that has components working together to bring about an identifiable purpose. Well, on the same basis, you have an object absent the human factor. That also allows us to conclude that the eye, the acorn, the dog, the flower, and so forth also must have had an ultimate intelligent cause. So the design argument. And then we moved last time into a second argument for the existence of God, which is traditionally called the cosmological argument. Notice the word cosmos in that argument, referring to an orderly universe. And I intended to give 2 formulations of that argument. One, what I call the contingency to incontingency argument, and then a second formulation of the cosmological argument, which I call a process of elimination argument. Last time, we gave the contingency to incontingency formulation. Let me just review that. We can begin on that argument with a train moving along on tracks. You see a series of boxcars only moving from left to right. Neither a single boxcar nor the whole series, for that matter, of boxcars has the wherewithal, that is the capacity to account for the motion. And so then there is an implied locomotive, an unmoved mover, even though you do not see it physically. That is, given the laws of nature, there must be something that does not have the adequate that does have the adequate wherewithal to move the boxcars. We call that a locomotive. The boxcars are dependent, that is, they are contingent things, but the locomotive in this analogy is an independent, an incontingent thing. It moves itself. It is a self-mover in this analogy. And so the boxcars represent the contingent beings in this world, and the locomotive represents the necessary incontingent being which we call God. So cosmological argument number one, we raise the question then, are there contingent beings that exist in this world? And then we name some of these, of course, a cow or a human being or a tomato or a container or an automobile or any other, even non-human-made objects. They do exhibit the notion of contingency, or the property, I should say, of contingency. There are indeed contingent beings in this world. Well, how do we account for their origin? How did they get here? Their existence implies the existence of an adequate and necessary incontingent being. And this is because the contingent cannot account for its own existence. And so then, precisely put, cosmological argument number one, since contingent beings exist and contingent beings imply the existence of an adequate incontingent being for their existence, then it follows, therefore, that an adequate incontingent being, namely God, exists. And so then contingent beings imply an incontingent being, moved things imply an unmoved mover, causes and effects imply an ultimate uncaused cause. So that was the review of what we've covered up to this point, and now we can proceed into cosmological argument number two. And I call this a process of elimination argument. And this reasoning begins by noticing that things exist in the present, lots of things. How did it all get here? Well, if we can just step back and try to simplify this so that I do not have to repeat myself all the time, let us say that the letter N represents the whole statement. The contingent beings that we observe popped into existence out of nothing. N standing for nothing. And then let I stand for another statement. They are the present effect of an infinite series of matters, causes, and effects. I for infinite. And then the third possibility, G, they were created by a being external to them, at least equal to the task that stands for the statement that God exists. So here's the argument. Premise number one, things exist in the present. Premise number two, in order to account for their presence, either N is true, or I is true, or G is true. That is, they either popped into existence out of nothing, or they are the present effect of an infinite series of matters, causes, and effects, or they were created by a being external to them, equal to the task, namely God. That's premise number two. Premise number three, well, not N. That doesn't work. They could not have popped into existence out of nothing, because if there was ever a moment when nothing existed, that is absolutely nothing, there would be nothing existing now. So that would have to be a nonsense claim, and thus we reject that. Next, the answer cannot be infinite series of causes and effects, as we alluded to in the previous episode. That is to say, the claim that the present, the things, the existing and contingent things that exist in the present are the result of an infinite series of causes and effects. That cannot be true, because that would mean then that the present is the end of an infinite series, and infinity then was traversed to get to the present. Well, that by definition cannot be true. You cannot traverse infinity. If you cannot traverse infinity from the present back to the past, then you cannot traverse infinity from an infinite past up to the present. You cannot traverse infinity by definition. That's what infinity means. No end, no finis. And so then that one is not true. And since the second premise exhausted all possibilities to account for the existence of these present contingent things that we see, then it cannot be that, I should say that it must be that the only thing that is left, namely the existence of God being external to them, and causing them is the truth. Again, let me say that once again now. So, premise number 1, contingent things exist in the present. Premise number 2, either came into existence out of nothing, or they are the result of an infinite series of causes and effects, or the only other possibility is that something external to them is at least equal to the task of causing them, and being itself an incontingent thing, and therefore accounts for their existence. Well, it's not coming into existence out of nothing. You cannot traverse infinity, and therefore, by process of elimination, it must be that the only alternative, namely God, is in existence. God accounts for these contingent things.
And I think it's very important, and of course, at the present, this is just an audio, but, actually, I think we are working on getting slides to this, but I think it's just so important for us to realize that premise number 2, either they popped into existence out of nothing, or they are an infinite series of matters, causes, and effects, or they're made by God. I mean, I think we have to emphasize that, and George mentioned it a couple times in that, but those are the only possible exhaust. There's no other option but those 3. And since it's not, they popped into existence, and it cannot be the infinite series of causes, it has to be. I mean, has to be, whether you believe it or not, whether you understand it or not. I mean, you can comprehend it, but it has to be. And, of course, we talked about this in the earlier episodes of this season, that, any logical argument, if it's, valid and sound, I mean, if those premises, and this is
if it's valid and all the premises are true,
the conclusion has to be true. It's like there's no option; it has to be.
Right. So that's why I called this a process of elimination argument. We've exhausted all possibilities. We know that they exist in the present. Only a silly person would deny that. And, how do we account for their origin? How did they get here? Well, there are 3 possibilities. And
those are the only 3 possibilities.
And if you can eliminate 2, then the other one necessarily follows, must be the truth.
Again, going back, this is why we have to define our terms. I once heard a debate where a creationist and an atheist were debating several premises, but one of them was something right along these lines here, and the atheist says something along the lines, well, something can come from nothing, but he redefined the term nothing. And so for him, nothing was like nothing on the visible spectrum or something like that. And he says, even with nothing, like if you go to outer space, there's nothing. There's still dark matter and all this kind of stuff. And he says, well, no, that's not nothing. So it's nothing. And so they just kind of change the terminology. So they're moving the goalposts. So they can take the word nothing and assign to it attributes of something, and then call it nothing, and then say, here's how something can come from nothing.
That would just be a semantic game.
Exactly.
If, in fact, you have something, however you characterize it, then you've got something, right? You don't have nothing. When we say nothing, we mean absolutely nothing, zero. Mm-hmm. However, eventually we run out of words in describing it, but that's what we mean by
the absence of everything.
That's right. Absence of everything would be another way of saying it. With the King's English, eventually we'll run out of words, but that's what we're pointing to with these terms. And now, if in fact someone asserts that there is something out there, then, of course, all they're doing is moving the argument back to that. Where'd that come from? Right. And then we're starting it from ground zero all over again, trying to explain the origin of it. So it's inescapable. We do need to come up with an explanation for the origin of the something that is present. And so, again, things exist in the present. If this is denied, remember René Descartes' argument, I think, therefore I am. That is, even if I doubt my existence, I must exist to do the doubting. So it's inescapable that something exists, at least I exist, and I'm a contingent thing. And, of course, more than I exist, but it's inescapable that something does exist, and that something is contingent. And so then how did it get here? Well, it's either it popped into existence out of nothing, which I believe we can show is just absolute nonsense. If there was ever a time when there was nothing, then there'd be nothing now. I mean nothing, the absence of something. Or it's an infinite series of of matter's cause and effect, or it's something external to it, equal to the task, namely, in other words, God. Well, it can't be N. This is true because it can't be nothing, because if there ever were nothing in existence, there would be nothing now. Nothing does not have the capacity to cause anything, right? Mm-hmm. So that can't work. Well, it can't be infinite series of cause and effect. This is true because, by definition, infinity cannot be traversed to get to the present things that exist, by definition. And therefore, by process of elimination, in logic, this is called a disjunctive syllogism. If you exhaust all possibilities in an early premise, and you succeed in denying everything but one, then the only thing that is left must be the true statement.
And I think it's important, too, like the so-called Big Bang Theory. You know, supposedly matter was the size of a pinhead, and then it blew up. But, I mean, that still begs the question, where did that matter come from? That's right. And what caused the bang? Exactly. You know, what is the cause, the adequate cause?
Where did the thing that exploded come from?
Mm-hmm. And so
we're just moving the argument back. That's all. That's
right.
That ultimately is an evasion, and we're interested in the actual ultimate explanation of this, and we contend that it all leads necessarily to the existence of God.
Okay. Yes. And so far as the process of elimination argument, there's another one that you have that involves the moral aspect.
So let's move on to that then, the moral argument for the existence of God. And I intend to give two formulations of this argument today. And to help understand the first formulation, we can begin with a claim that some have made, followed by a question for discussion. And here are some claims regarding the Manson murders, for example, in August 1969, the so-called Tate and LaBianca killings. In a documentary, decades later, Charles Manson, looking back, said, quote, "You do what you feel is right. You do what you think is right. Now, whatever you think is right has got to be right," unquote. Now, think carefully about that statement. A Manson follower, Lynette Squeaky Fromm, observed, quote, "But I still believe that they were right because they felt right. They felt that despite the ugliness of it, it was the right thing to do," unquote. So this gives rise to a question that I'd like for us to think about for a moment. Is the basis of what is morally right and morally wrong ourselves, or something external to us? That is, what determines moral right and wrong? Either I do, or another human, or some group of humans that I choose, or is it something outside of all of us? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like the second way that you kind of expanded on that, because there was some that would argue about, is it ourselves or something external? There are some that would argue it's not just me, myself, but it's the culture. It's the group thing. So whatever the group has decided on is moral or immoral, then that's the standard for what it is.
Right. So it's not just one person, but maybe there's some selection or some preferred selection of scholars or something.
But just like with the cosmological argument, and one highlighter, I mean, argues all the way back to God. I mean, so morality, because it's definitely rationally, logically, it's outside of myself, the standard. Now, there's some subjective things, but they're not really moral. Like, I might like chocolate ice cream today, but not like it tomorrow, you know. But that's not a moral thing, but morality, you know, what you ought to do. You know, morality involves oughtness, not just something is, but oughtness.
And what's the absolute basis upon which we would make a claim that such and such is a moral act and this action is immoral? Mm-hmm. Upon what do we base that is the question. Is it the human being? Is it a group of human beings that I happen to select? Is it all of the human beings? Is that going to work? Or must it be something external to us to which we go to determine what we must say is moral and immoral?
I think there's some examples also to look at in just history, how in every culture, just about at every period of time, there are some things that are staples in those cultures. Now, not in every single example, but in most cultures, it's wrong to kill. wrong to murder. So where would various cultures in various times in various places, how would they come to that same exact conclusion? I think that is one evidence that there's something outside of those individuals in different places. Just like, people will point to, it's always, I don't want to say it's comical, but it's ironic almost that people would say, well, look, you have these pyramids and these various continents. That points to these aliens, or, they came down and showed everybody how to make the same pyramids. And they, so you can at least say, well, you see something that demonstrates there's a unique or a common, a creator or something like that. But then when you come to moral staples within a community, well, that does not point to anything. That's just happenstance or something, How can you have these various locations that come to, and various cultures, and with all sorts of different backgrounds and things, how can they come to those same conclusions? I think it has to point to something outside of those cultures that has created a baseline standard for what's right and wrong. That would
be an interesting study would be to collect some of those common principles of morality and then raise the question, why are they common? Mm-hmm. So, but we're coming back to what philosophers call subjective ethics versus objective ethics. So if we claim that the basis of morality is the human being or some group of human beings, and the human being or human beings then feel that this particular action is moral and they feel that this particular action is immoral, that is what is termed subjective ethics. Subjective ethics referring to the claim that morality is solely determined by what human being or human beings feel about a particular matter. On the other hand, there is the view called objective ethics. Objective ethics simply means that the standard, that is, the basis of what is morally right and morally wrong, is something independent of human beings, to which human beings look to determine that this particular action is moral or this one is immoral. And so then there you have the two bases of moralities that are out there on the table, subjective ethics versus objective ethics. Now here is moral argument number one. Premise number one, either atheism is true or theism is true. This exhausts all possibilities. By atheism, of course, we mean that God does not exist. There is no God. Versus theism, God does exist. Well, it's either one or the other. This exhausts all possibilities. We know that because of the very terms that we're using here, theism and atheism. Theism means belief in God. Atheism, that A is coming from a Greek word meaning not. No, it's a denial, the contradiction of theism. So that exhausts all possibilities. Premise number two, if atheism is true, then subjective ethics must be true. That is to say, if there is no God, then the basis of morality as to what is morally right, what is morally wrong, all you're left with is the human being. And so then it would have to be a subjective ethics. Premise number three, but if subjective ethics is true, then a contradiction follows. That is, human beings contradict one another in their opinions, in their feelings. Even the same person can contradict himself or herself. They feel that they have mixed feelings about something. Notice that term that we sometimes use, mixed feelings, even within the same person. So, or take, for example, the Nazis in their treatment of the Jews. Many of them felt that that was the right thing to do. Well, if I can find somebody else who felt the opposite, like myself, then that would mean, given subjective ethics, that then the action was both moral and immoral simultaneously. They feel it's right, I feel it's wrong, and if subjective ethics, if human feeling is the only basis, is the sole basis for determining what's morally right and wrong, then I've got a contradiction that follows. Premise number four, all contradictions are false. Premise number five, therefore, subjective ethics must be false, because any doctrine, and we can show this logically, any doctrine that implies a false doctrine is itself false. Therefore, atheism must be false because atheism implies subjective ethics, which we've determined is false, demonstrated as false. And again, anything that implies a false doctrine is itself false. Therefore, then atheism is false, and thus theism, the only alternative to atheism, must be true. So again, going through that quickly, moral argument number one. Premise number one, either atheism or theism. Premise two, if atheism, then subjective ethics. Premise three, if subjective ethics, then a contradiction follows. Premise four, not a contradiction. That can't be true. All contradictions are false. Premise five, therefore subjective ethics must be false. Therefore atheism must be false. Therefore it must be that the only alternative to atheism, namely theism, is true. Anybody have any thoughts on that argument?
No, it's clear, but it's a lot. Mm-hmm.
A lot of premises, but when you follow them, it's true because
you have to go through these because you think about it carefully.
Yeah, all the premises are true. Therefore, the conclusions, and this has three conclusions in it, but the ultimate conclusion is God exists.
Yeah, there's a lot of material there, but I think it's worth looking at because if there is a God, or if let's just say if there is even the question that there is a God, then it's worth investigating because if there is a God, and he is the God of the Bible, and he is moral, and he will judge, and he is these things that he describes himself as being, then it's worth one's time and energy to expend to exhaust every option, investigate everything you can, leave no stone unturned, so you can discover whether or not this thing is true. There's too much at stake to just leave it up to chance.
Right on the heels of that, Stephen, one gentleman said, if there is no God, then nothing really matters. When you come right down to it, we can eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. He says, again, if there is no God, nothing really matters. Not really. Mm-mm. On the other hand, if there is a God, nothing matters more.
Absolutely.
So that's a wonderful pursuit. Maybe talk about this argument once again and spend a little more time on justifying each statement. What you do with an argument is you set it forth, and then you go back and look at each statement and think about them and see if that's true or false. And if it's true, then you go to the next and so forth, and you put them all together.
Yeah.
So the first premise, either atheism or theism, well, that does exhaust all possibilities, doesn't it? It has to be one or the other. If it's not one, it has to be the other, right?
And in simpler language, either God exists or he does not exist.
Right. It's one or the other. And if you can show that God does not exist, then you have thereby shown that the only alternative must be
God
true.
Does exist.
And on the other hand, if you can show that it works in the other direction too, if you can show, of course, that there is no God, it must be that theism is false. So it's one or the other. That exhausts all possibilities. That's good because now we can try to see if we can determine whether one is true or false, and that also implies the truth value of the other. So premise number two, if atheism is true, then subjective ethics is true. Well, if there is no God, then all that is left as the basis of morals is the human being and what humans feel about it. Right? And so then that follows. And then premise number three, if subjective ethics is the case, that is, if right and wrong is solely determined by what people feel about it, human beings, then since human beings contradict themselves, their feelings, as illustrated by the Nazis, some of them felt that was the right thing to do, and I feel it's the wrong thing to do. So it must be both right and wrong if that's all you've got is subjective ethics. There's no standard outside of the human being. Well, but all contradictions are false. Now, if you deny that, you're carrying the very fabric of reality. If you'd have to, in order to deny the law of non-contradiction, you'd have to use the law of non-contradiction to deny it. So you'd be shooting yourself in the foot. So that's inescapably true, that all contradictions are false. Different humans, or even the same human, can have and do have contradictory feelings on whether the same action is moral or immoral. But all contradictions are false. This is a self-evident truth, one of the laws of thought. And therefore it must be that subjective ethics is false. Just combine 3 and 4. And therefore, it must be that atheism is false. Just combine premises 2 and 5. And therefore, it must be that the only alternative to atheism, namely theism, must be true. Some good thought, good honest thought given to each of the premises, I believe, shows that therefore this conclusion must be the case.
Yeah, the conclusion is definitely undeniable based upon the premises. And the premises exhaust all possibilities.
Right.
I mean,
so. If you've denied one, then you have thereby implied that the other one must be the case. And just as a matter of interest, the Bible itself, the Bible puts it like this in Jeremiah 10:23. O Lord, I know the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man who walks to direct his steps. So Jeremiah 10:23 is denying here what we call subjective ethics. So that's moral argument number 1. Moral argument number 2. Thomas B. Warren provided some helpful preliminary information to think about before we formulate moral argument number 2 in this series. He explains that to justify the claim that an action is evil, what ought to be done, there must be an objective standard, that is some law that action violates. If we know that there is evil, then we know that there was a law that was violated. In the Warren Flew debate, he puts it like this. Atheist Flew says the Nazis were guilty of real, objective, moral wrong. So that's an admission by the atheist Flew in that debate. That means real, moral wrong, which entails an objective standard, Warren points out. An objective standard, that is some higher law. Warren pressed the point in the question. He says, what law then did the Nazis violate? If you're going to agree that there is an objective moral standard that they violated, what is that standard then? What law did the Nazis violate? It cannot be the law of England or America, for they were not under the jurisdiction of England or America. It cannot be passed pre-Nazi German law, that is, it cannot be ex post facto law, for the Nazis made their own laws for their time. As Justice Robert Jackson said at the Nuremberg trial, 1945 to 46, quote, it was some higher law that transcends the provincial and the transient that they violated, the Nazis. The provincial is the area of Germany, that is the geographical area, and the transient is the period of time in which the Nazis had charge of Germany. So Warren continues, above what is involved in a certain locality during a certain period of time. That is what they violated. Also, Warren points to such an objective standard as the only justifiable basis upon which one can judge that there is moral degeneration in a society. Witness the Nazi regime based on Hitler's whims and fancies compared with the way it was before Hitler. Or if you claim that there is moral progress made in a society compared with a previous or subsequent society. If you're going to say that there is moral progress made or a moral degeneration, you are thereby implying that there was some objective standard of morality against you, which you are making that measure. Now, with all of that in mind, let me formulate moral argument number 2. Premise number 1. And think about each of these premises, these statements, carefully, one by one, as we proceed through. Premise number 1. If we can know that there is objective, that is outside of humans, moral evil, then we can know that there is a transcendent law that was violated. Transcendent meaning above the provincial and the transient. Premise number 2. If we can know that there is a transcendent law that was violated, then we can know that there is a transcendent moral lawgiver, which we call God. In other words, you cannot have a transcendent law without a lawgiver. Premise number 3, we can know that there is objective moral evil, evil that is outside of human feeling. Premise number 4, therefore, we can know that there is transcendent law that was violated. This just combines 1 and 3. And therefore, conclusion, we can know that there is transcendent moral lawgiver, God. And so then, there we have argument number 2. Quickly, I'll go through it again. Premise number 1, if we can know that there is an objective moral evil, or moral evil that is external to our own feelings, if we can say that that is the case, then it must be that there's something transcendent, a transcendent law, something above geography and time that was violated. And if we can know that, then we can know that there is a transcendent moral lawgiver who gave that law. Premise 3, we can know that there is objective evil, and not the ripple effect continues, and therefore it must be that there was a transcendent law that the Nazis violated, and that law, therefore, was the result of a lawgiver, and that lawgiver had to be outside of human beings. Where did it come from, if not from God, is the conclusion, therefore, of moral argument number 2.
The argument of morality, I think, is a really, really strong argument. I've heard people kind of fumble over various explanations in times past. You know, the group decides what's right, or it's just always known. Everybody knows this is right or wrong. And while that may or may not be true, it still has to come from somewhere. And to use people, we do contradict each other all the time. And you even mentioned, I think you said, how we can contradict ourselves in that at one point you may think something's right or wrong, and later you can change your mind. So what was the standard if there was one?
And even simultaneously, we conflict with ourselves, because here we're talking about emotions. And I can recall there's some documentaries that I, after realizing and appreciating this argument, I began looking for examples of what we sometimes call mixed feelings among people. And one good source was some of these detective stories where they'll talk about a murder or some atrocity that took place, and then they'll interview the victims. I should say the victims' loved ones, and I've documented quotations from these people who say, for example, there was one individual who was went to a river, and which is where his loved one was murdered. And he said that he has mixed feelings when he goes down there. On the one hand, he feels a comfort. On the other hand, he feels horror simultaneously, because he's thinking of. He wants to be where this person that he loved was last living, and that gives him some comfort. But simultaneously thinks of the murder, and he struggles with this. So there's an example, even within the human psyche, where there is, because we're dealing with emotions, you can have multiple emotions, even opposite emotions, at the same time, and about the same situation. And if we're going to base morality upon human feeling, human emotion, then we have a contradiction that takes place, and that, therefore, is not a reliable basis upon which to determine what is moral and what is immoral. That leads you to say, well, this is moral and that's immoral, and somebody else says something opposite, and to each his own. Rather, we are forced into acknowledging that, therefore, there must be an objective, an outside of human feeling basis upon which morality is determined, and where else but God.
Yep, and that's undeniable, rationally undeniable, I should say. People will deny it, but you just cannot, especially when you have an argument like this. And the Nazis, of course, provide a great example of, we're forced into acknowledging there has to be a standard outside of humanity. Right.
And we talk about, what we sometimes talk about, they committed crimes against humanity. Well, what do we mean by that? And that gives rise to the question, going back to this moral argument number 2, premise 3. We said we can know that there is an objective moral evil. We can know that. How do we know that? That's a wonderful segue into the next episode. How can we know that there is objective moral evil? We can give examples of atrocities and raise the question, now, did they do something wrong there? And then if we answer that yes, how do you know that they did something wrong? That's what we want to press, and that will lead us nicely into moral argument number 3 next time.
Yes, for episode 7. And so we really appreciate George sharing this with us,
Absolutely.
and we appreciate this opportunity to learn more about these arguments. And again, the basis of this whole season is so that we may know how to answer those who ask a reason of the hope that is in us. And so that's what Christian apologetics is all about. So we thank you for joining us on this episode, and we look forward to being with you next time as we continue this discussion of Christian apologetics.
Calvary, pave the way by blood that we might win a bright shining crown. Praise His holy name. Salvation has been brought down. Oh glory, praise the Lord. Bless the Lord. Salvation has been brought down from heaven. Go and shout and tell it the world around. Go preach it and tell it today to people in sorrow. Tell it today and tell it tomorrow. Preach the word of God that we might win a shining crown. Heaven, tell the lost, all the lost. Salvation is full and free to sinners, friends, and blessedness all over the land and sea. Go teach it and tell it afar.